intentionally narrow the focus of my paper or redefine the geopolitical definition because I want to send a certain message, and I think or at least raise a few questions for discussion later. So that's my intention. But before I do that, I'd like to bring your attention to how do I get back? Okay, I'd like to bring your attention to the Chinese characters behind my name here, Ngo Vinh. In Chinese, Wu Yung Long. I want to point that out because I want to point out that I'm not anti-Chinese. I'm joking. Now the other thing is that you see most Vietnamese, when they hear my name, they said, "Oh, the everlasting dragon," without knowing that, of course, that's true, that 99% of the Vietnamese name Long means dragon. But whenever it goes to Vinh, then it means forever, or I should say perpetually distinguished, perpetually majestic, or dignified. And you can see that I'm not that really dignified. But and even Chinese, you see, when they hear the word Lung, they say, "Oh, dragon." But and I said, no, it's Jian Lung, the Lung. And they say, "Who's Jian Lung?" Càng Long was one of the Chinese emperors. So I think it's a joke here, but I just want to show that. Okay, so let me go. How do I go to that? Okay. Can I do the big thing on the thing so that I can expand it to full. No. Okay. That's okay. Then I read from there because I just can't have in mind. Yeah. Now, this presentation will examine Vietnam's geopolitical position simply on account of its geographical proximity and political proximity to China. In terms of geographical proximity, on the geographical front, Vietnam's proximity to China has created great pressures on Vietnam, not only along Vietnam's border with China, but also along Vietnam's western borders, as well as from the air and from space. Now, pressures from the northern border include military pressures and also security pressures, commercial and trade pressures. Pressures from the western borders include the Mekong River. Let me see. Okay. Pressures from the northern border, the western borders include Mekong River Dams project in China proper and in Laos, indirect pressures through Cambodia and Laos. Pressure from the air and from space include control of airspace and possible air attacks from China, frequent control and attacks of Vietnam's cyberspace. And I would like to make a quick comment here. I have talked with many high-level Vietnamese officials, and they entrusted to me that China infiltration of Vietnam's cyberspace had become so serious that many years ago when I talked with people, I said whenever we had something important to talk with with each other, we had to write on papers. So that was the extent of the intrusion. Now the end result, I shouldn't say the end result, but the result is that by the late 1980s and early 1990s, Vietnam was already very close to China politically and hence has increasingly succumbed to China's pressure on a wide variety of areas. One, I'd like to talk about, a little bit about border trade. Border trade has increased exponentially, but largely to the detriment of local Vietnamese production and business enterprises. Vietnam trade deficit to China in 2015, for example, was over 32 billion US dollars, or 1/5 of Vietnam's GDP. This is not taking into account illicit border trade or smuggling. Partly as a result of cheap imports from China, every year in the last few years, several 100,000 Vietnamese small and medium business enterprises have gone bankrupt. Chinese investment. It is difficult to gauge the true extent of China's investment in Vietnam, partly because Chinese enterprises have been largely fronted by local Vietnamese and through joint ventures with business enterprises from other countries in the region. Case in point is the Formosa steel mill in Hatton, which has been accused or suspected for having caused massive dead fish along the coastal areas of central Vietnam. And those of you who have read in the press have seen that it has now affected about 15 million people along the coastal area, and it's spreading, south and north. Anyway, this Formosa company has been identified in the Western press as Taiwanese, but the reality is that it's a joint venture between this Taiwanese company and a Chinese company. And this Chinese company, mainland Chinese company, has contacts with high-level leaders in the Chinese government. Anyway, besides that fact, the company employs over 10,000 workers from China proper itself. This company has a 70-year land lease at extremely low, favorable prices. Other long-term leases are in what Vietnamese experts have considered sensitive strategic areas. I mention here only two examples. One is forest land in Maine and northern provinces and beachfront resorts in Da Nang. These areas are practically extraterritorial property of China. Recently, when you have a Formosa incident of Formosa, the leaders in Vietnam say that we have no right to get in there into the company to investigate, because we have treaties with China. And the same thing happened before in the beach resorts in Da Nang. Some Chinese were killing each other with weapons. So the Vietnamese authorities wanted to go over there to investigate, and they were not allowed to. And later on, it was found out that these were prostitution places, and then also gangs and a lot of weapons and so forth and so on. And the Vietnamese authorities, or at least provincial authorities, have not been able to investigate these areas of property. Now, let me talk about land lease. In Lang Son province bordering China, which served as a battleground for the bloody Chinese attack in 1979, in 2010, it was reported by the Vietnamese press that some 60,000 out of 400,000 hectares, or about 16% of forest land, was leased for 50 years to the Ngo Vinh Company of China, and close to 10,000 hectares to Champion Lodges of Taiwan, at the cost of less than the purchasing price of a kilogram of vegetables, or 20 US cents per square meter of land, and this company is used for planting eucalyptus or acacia. Local people organized themselves to stop the preparation of the land because they had been using this land for planting trees and for raising cattle, and of course, you see, it ended up in repression by the local authority. Now, the leasing of land to foreign companies, mainly to Chinese-owned Ngo Vinh, all over the country, created an uproar. The reported amounts leased were 300,000 hectares of forest land in 10 provinces bordering China and Laos, to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China, 87% of which was to the later country, i.e. China itself. Angry with the government, and for the first time ever, in the meeting of the National Assembly, which is just like your Congress here, on June 11, 2010, the chief of the National Defense Committee accused the government for underreporting the magnitude of the problem. His committee's investigation has shown that the leasing occurred in 18 provinces encompassing over 400,000 hectares of forest land. Before that, retired General Lieutenant General Dong Sĩ Nguyên, a former Deputy Prime Minister and former member of the Political Bureau of the Vietnamese Communist Party, and one who used to supervise the planting of forests, issued a public letter with another general questioning the program on account of both national security and the possible destruction of natural forests designated for environmental protection purposes. Now, let me talk about contractual work. Contractual work. According to the official figures, more than 90% of infrastructure, mining, and construction projects in Vietnam have been given to Chinese enterprises, partly because of favorable treatment given by the central government as a result of political pressures, and partly through lowballing and bribes. But the real impacts have been environmental damages as well as late and unfinished work. Examples include unfinished and shut-day street projects in Ho Chi Minh City, and many of you who went to Vietnam a few years ago can see that there were kind of, blocks right in the middle of and how to say, cross thing, whatever, and most of them belong to Chinese contractors and subcontractors. The same thing happened in Hanoi and many other cities. A visible case that you can now see that has caused a lot of complaint in Vietnam is the unfinished railway or metro project in Hanoi. And the Chinese company that had the contract said it ran out of money, so it can't continue, forcing the Vietnamese government to have to give it more money before it can, begin work again. Now, the situation of unfinished and sloppy contractual works by Chinese companies had become so serious that when General Secretary Nguyễn Phú Trọng visited China in April 6 to 10, 2015, he pleaded with Xi Jinping publicly, and this was the first order of the day, to intervene so as to preserve the good relationship between the two countries. This led to much ridicule back in Vietnam. My take on it is this: Nguyễn Phú Trọng was complaining. He was reading the riot act, so to speak, to Xi Jinping. They say, hey, I think that I thought that we are buddies, but if you keep on treating me like this, you make my position impossible, and I'm going to the United States very soon. Remember, so he went to the United States after that. But I won't go into that here. Now, what I want to do is, with that very brief thing, I want to make some recommendations. Given the geopolitical situation I just mentioned, one could perhaps understand why Vietnamese authorities have largely been at sea, so to speak, joking again, in terms of dealing with China's assertive, if not to say outright aggressive, activities in the South China Sea. After all, China used force to take over the entire Paracel archipelago in 1974, as well as the submerged reefs belonging to Vietnam in the Spratly archipelago in 1988, killing many Vietnamese defenders in the process. I do not want to delve into China's activities here. What I want to point out is the fact that the restraint, if not to say timidity, by Vietnamese party state in its responses to China's activities has caused many of its citizens to call into question its legitimacy. By its legitimacy, I mean the legitimacy of the Vietnamese party state. Some of these timid responses have been unnecessary, if not to say ridiculous. I just want to mention 3 examples here to illustrate my point. The first is the mixed reaction to the 1997 Conference on the South China Sea and the corresponding security situation in South Asia, organized by the group of overseas Vietnamese scholars in New York City. This group actually involved Vietnamese scholars and researchers in Japan, in 7 countries in Europe, and also here in the United States. I'll give some detail about that event shortly. Now, second, the official reference by Vietnamese officials to Vietnamese Vietnamese boats attacked and sunk by Chinese ships, euphemistically as by quote-unquote strange boat or tàu lạ, whereas many Vietnamese have referred to them as ba tàu, literally mean 3 boats, or the traditional colloquium for Chinese or China. And you can see there's a conflict here between ordinary Vietnamese. Again, they don't want to call China by name, but they talk ba tàu, which is a colloquial Vietnamese term to contradict the tàu lạ term by the state. Is a very interesting question here. But anyway, I want to mention a third thing. The frequent use of force to disperse demonstrations by Vietnamese citizens to protest attacks by the strange boats mentioned, and other acts of provocations by China in the South China Sea. And that has also caused a lot of friction between ordinary Vietnamese citizens and the state. Now let me go back to the first thing I talked to you about. In 1997, the group of Vietnamese scholars that included Dr. Vũ Quang Việt, sitting in the back there, and myself, we saw problems arising about the South China Sea in connection with the geopolitical situation in Southeast Asia and East Asia. So we organized a conference in New York. And when we organized the conference in New York, many of the papers were circulated or sent to the Vietnamese government first. So the Prime Minister's office in Vietnam saw that it was an important project. And the Prime Minister's office sent 2 representatives to the conference. They were former officials, just so that to tone down the situation. But one was a high official, former official in the ministry, foreign ministry, and the other one was the former head of the border office or department, overseeing all the borders, with Vietnam. So the Prime Minister's office took this very, very seriously. And a number of papers are still, quite important. There were 2 papers on legal matters, one of which is by a lady, and I think, legal scholars, can still benefit from her work, but there was another one. Anyway, so after the conference, the Prime Minister office and the political, how do you say that, the nhà xuất bản chính trị quốc gia, the national political publisher of Vietnam, was, which was a very famous, still famous publisher, wanted to publish our thing. It took us 2 years to negotiate with the authorities and people in Vietnam over almost every sentence, what to include and what not to include. And so there were quotations from Western sources, and that we translated literally, and they wanted these quotations to be, omitted, or they just tried to translate it wrongly. I mean, at that time, I was in Vietnam for a year. I taught at a national university in Hanoi, a number of other universities. So I negotiated with these people for our other contributors. So finally, the book was published, and the director of the nhà xuất bản chính trị quốc gia was thrilled about it. He went to me and said, "Okay, finally we have it." Then a few days later, he said, "Well, sorry to tell you that, but the Politburo has ordered all the copies to be burned." So I said, "What? The Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister himself, negotiated this thing, and now you burn it? What are you doing?" So I told the director of the publishing house and also the aides of Prime Minister Phan Văn Khải to appeal to the Politburo. And after several months, the Politburo came back and said, "Okay, the compromise is we just take off all the covers, and then you have to put a new cover on that." And so this is a new cover. The new and the new cover means proceedings of a conference on regional development in the Asia-Pacific region and disputes in the South China Sea. So I said, okay, and then under here, it's, right here, it says for circulation, within, the government only. Basically, that's what it means. So the director of the publishing house, I was going to go back here, and he said, okay, so now with this compromise, you can take 100 copies of this thing back to your friends, so each of you may have 2 or 3 copies of whatever. But no. So that's what happened. Then you see he packed this up. He personally delivered it to my house, my apartment in Hanoi. Then a couple of days later, the order was that I could only bring out 10 copies. I said, "Are you kidding me? We are the authors of this thing, and but that was the extent of timidity, I would say. And as I said a while ago, there was no reason for that kind of thing, especially with something that had already had permission. So, what I want to say is this. One could perhaps rationalize these restraints on the part of the Vietnamese government toward China if there has been some reciprocal or some acts from Chinese political leaders. On the contrary, China has increasingly stepped up its harms and not charms offensives toward Vietnam, and to a lesser extent toward other countries in the region. The situation has now reached a boiling point, not only in the South China Sea, but also inside Vietnam itself, threatening the welfare of Vietnam's inhabitants as well as the political stability of the country, perhaps even the raison d'etre of the party state itself. In face of the present predicaments, it is necessary for the Vietnamese government to take proactive steps to regain the confidence of its citizens and to rally the support of the international community in the efforts to bring about a peaceful resolution to the crisis in the South China Sea as well as political crisis in Vietnam. These steps include, I just make a few points here, there are so many different things, but just very quickly. One, make a public challenge to China to agree, along with Vietnam, to bring the disputes in the South China Sea to the International Court of Justice, the International Court of Laws of the Sea, the Court of Arbitration established according to Appendix 7 of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, and the Special Court established according to Appendix 8. Two, bring China to the International Court of Public Opinion through exposure of China's persistent refusal to live up to its own promises, as well as its unwillingness to abide by the international laws and by the stipulation of the treaties that China is a party of. Two, make active appeals to neighboring countries on the need for bringing about a peaceful resolution for the sake of stability and development in the region. In the case of landlocked Laos, for example, and I can deal with, I have suggestions for every country, but I don't want to do it, I don't have time. But in the case of landlocked Laos, for example, Vietnam could offer to provide easy access to the South China Sea with a system of roads leading to Da Nang and other port areas. And this also lessened Laos the reliance on the dams, invested by Chinese funds and so on and so on. Four, provide outside countries is the term used by China, right, referring to the United States. Right? Provide outside countries, such as the United States, reasons that they could use to rally their citizens' support for their presence in the region and their commitment to contribute to peace, stability, and prosperity in the region. Vietnam's geographic composition in Southeast Asia, with its proximity to China and its long coastline covering most of the western part of the South China Sea, should give Vietnam the advantage and the moral authority to speak up and reach out to other countries. With regards to the United States, just one. It is understandable that many Vietnamese have been leery about America's long-term commitment to small countries in East Asia, giving the many times that they have fallen victims to U.S. big power politics. But they should also understand that America's long-term power depends on its commitment to freedom of navigation and naval supremacy, which ultimately rests on trust by other countries. And last and not least, to the above ends, the Vietnamese government should allow Vietnam scholars and citizens to make their views known to the world without impediment. Otherwise, the current repressed dissatisfaction will probably result in either implosion or explosion, or both, with far-reaching consequences not only to Vietnam itself, but perhaps also to many other countries. Thank you very much.